how can you be happy and who can show you the path to happiness? Bobby Jamieson has more for you in episode 131 of Manly with Andy. It's the Manly with Andy podcast. I'm Andy, joined with Bobby Jamieson. He's written a book for you called Everything is Never Enough, Ecclesiastes' Surprising Path to Resilient Happiness, which is something that we're all striving for more than ever, Bobby. But I like to start every conversation with guys with the question, what do you think is the biggest challenge that men face today, and how do we overcome it?
The biggest challenge men face today is that men in our society are not needed, in the sense that, you can just have an independent life and career and be a single man. You can have an independent life and career and be a single woman. All your kinds of dreams, hopes, aspirations, you can just sort of pursue as an atomized individual. And another way of saying that is to say that to be a father has no honor in our society. It's not celebrated. It's not held up. It's not a goal. It's not a target. There's all the kind of stereotypical sitcom stereotypes of the just sort of goofy dad who's incompetent and can't do anything. And I think those get at a much deeper reality where it feels like men are kind of surplus to requirements. Who needs men? Is there anything good about men? As Roy Baumeister put it in a really provocative book on the subject. So what's the biggest challenge? Men aren't needed. What's the biggest challenge? Being a father in particular, I think is kind of held of no account. And I would say there's kind of a common grace answer, and there's kind of a full-blown Christian answer to overcoming it. I would say a common grace answer is kind of leaning into and gladly assuming responsibility. Show up, be dependable, be the kind of person other people can count on, be the kind of person who can bear other people's burdens and weight, whether that's emotional, financial, spiritual, practical. Be someone whom others can rely on, and you'll find yourself kind of stitching into a fabric and building a community even around yourself and your own kind competencies. But I would say, spiritually speaking, it's hard. Like who these days, who wants to get married? Who wants to be a parent? That's inconvenient. That's it doesn't seem exciting. It doesn't seem like a fulfilling sort of lifestyle. It seems like all sacrifice. As one of my friends put it, parenting is all joy and no fun. There's deep, satisfying goodness there, but there's a whole lot of inconveniences and self-sacrifices and death to self. And so in some ways, I think with the kind of widespread cultural breakdown of any agreed upon vision of masculinity, any agreed upon goodness of what it means to be a man, in some ways, a spiritual motivation that this is a way I'm called to die to myself. I'm called to put my wife's interests before myself. I'm called to care for my children before my own preferences or desires I would have. Jesus teaching, take up your cross and follow me. I think it's harder and harder to see a pathway to manhood that doesn't go through the cross. These things aren't rewarded in worldly terms. You don't get status, acclamation, achievement, honor, value in society by being a husband, being a father, sacrificing yourself for others. There has to be a motive, I think, kind of beyond this life.
Well, and you have a book that's just all about figuring out, okay, what the things of this life will not satisfy. So what else do we pursue? I'd love for you to start with your story and your journey to getting to the point of writing this book, because it's pretty deep. So I feel like you must wrestle with this, like we all do, of what purpose looks like.
Or yeah, there's kind of a surface story and a deeper story. The surface story is I am a pastor, and I was previously serving as an associate pastor of a church in Washington, D.C. I preached a series of sermons through the book of Ecclesiastes, kind of wrestling with each part of it in turn, in order. And I loved the book, and so did the congregation. And I just didn't want to give it up when I finished. I just didn't feel like being done with the book. I wanted to keep wrestling with it and learning from it. And so I thought about trying to write a book as a way to, just keep meditating on it, wrestling with its big themes. But I suppose then why? Why did the book resonate with me so deeply? Why did I not want to let it go? I think it's in part because the book raises these questions of ultimate meaning, ultimate purpose, ultimate significance. And in some ways, Ecclesiastes really does answer the question, how can I be happy? It is a more philosophical book. You could make an argument it's the only work of pure philosophy in the Bible. I think you make a decent argument on that front. So I suppose it's Lots of big questions, things I'd wrestled with personally. I was getting into my mid 30s, I'd lived a good bit of life and passed through challenges in my family and different hardships. And the book just really spoke to, you kind of have to live a certain length of time, unless you're like a very, very, very old soul. You have to live a certain length of time to sort of achieve enough dreams or get far enough into enough aspirations to then go, oh, wait a minute. Is this all it's going to be? Is this really what I should wrap up my life, my hopes, my dreams in? When the arc of your life starts to bend downward a little bit,
Mm.
when the curve starts to flatten, a book like Ecclesiastes really pops out at you.
Yeah, as you were just saying that, it's funny because, for my podcast here, I'm talking to you. I pre-record these, and so I had just got done recording another podcast or another interview for the podcast, and then, I had that moment of, God, is this it? Am I just going to be recording podcast interviews for the rest of my life? I love them, but it's a lot of work. But anyway, so I'm right there in this moment, in the thick of it. So let's jump into the structure of the book. First off, you have it's structured as three floors. So what is the significance behind that?
Yeah, it's me trying to capture kind of the thought structure of the book, not the order in which it unfolds, but kind of the shape of the author's thinking as a whole. I use this metaphor of a three-story building, specifically like looking out, the view from a three-story building. And most of the book is taken up with the ground floor, kind of what you see from ground level, just observation, experience, living life to the full, and seeing what it kind of turns back at you. And the author uses this one key word. In Hebrew, it's hevel. It's a hard word to translate. You could translate it as vanity, meaningless, transience. I like the word absurd because it gets at this disconnect between what we want from life and what it actually gives us, a disconnect between what people deserve and what they actually achieve. Every time there's a disconnect between either deserving or desire and what the world actually throws back at you is what the author of Ecclesiastes calls hevel or absurd. And so that's the kind of disappointment. That's the kind of like, the fastest person doesn't always win the race. The smartest person doesn't always get the job. The strongest army doesn't always win the war, all those kind of things. But as Ecclesiastes says, time and chance happen to them all. So that's a kind of demolition and deconstruction of us putting too much hopes, dreams, aspirations in any of this worldly good. And it's pretty brutal. It's pretty relentless. I'm not sure, Ecclesiastes ranks in the kind of all-time greats of all of literature for demolishing our dreams. That's the ground floor. The next floor, the second floor, is actually the author of the book calls himself in Hebrew Kohelet, which means the teacher or the preacher. Kohelet on the second floor talks about all of life being a gift. All of life is given from God. The fact that you're alive, every good thing in your life, however many days he gives you to live, it's all from him. And the weird thing is, he's looking at all the same stuff: marriage, work, money, possessions, kind of enjoyment of life, all the good things in it. And what he just said is all absurd. Now he says it's all a gift. And you're like, well, how can it be both? And that's part of the tension. That's part of the book's kind of magic, is that it is both. These things are fleeting. These things aren't perfect. They're not going to fill your heart, but there is genuine goodness to be received, thankfully, as a gift in every aspect of life. There's one thing we can probably get into, even in work. If you don't load up all your aspirations, hopes, dreams, identity, etc., into work, you can actually, even in the toil of recording podcast after podcast, you can enjoy the toil. You can anticipate the frustrations, the lag in the recording thing, or, when it forgets to record and you got to do it over again, or, you're having to stare into a Zoom screen. It's not the same thing as seeing somebody face to face. Even when you acknowledge all the limits, all the flaws, all the frustrations, there's still a goodness in that work to be received and appreciated and enjoyed. Ground floor, hevel, all is absurd. Second floor, everything's a gift. It's from God. And it takes recognizing that it is from God to really receive it as that. The third floor, you only get it at a few scattered places in the book, but it's actually a view into eternity. It's a view of the last judgment. It's a view of actually that there is a life after death. You'll give a reckoning before God for how you've lived. And so everything in this life has an eternal significance. This isn't all there is. So yeah, those three kind of stories, it's like each time you climb up, you get a bit more perspective. When you climb up to the third floor, you get a lot more perspective, but it's kind of elusive in the book of Ecclesiastes itself. There's only a few kind of cryptic references to that more eternal perspective.
Think just with that, what your explanation there, one word that popped out at me, and I thought maybe this is a word I shouldn't use anymore. Deserve. That's a weighted word. What do you think about that? Of okay, I've done this, I deserve this. I think maybe there's a lot of unexpected or expectations that are unmet because of that.
No, that's a great question. And I think there is an element of justice. There's different aspects of deserving, right? So, like, if you agree with an employer, this is what I'm going to get paid, they owe it to you. And it's a matter of justice for them to follow through. But if you go one click more subjective, it's like, well, if this is a really good podcast, don't I deserve for more people to hear it? Or don't I deserve some recognition? Don't I
Yeah.
deserve for that person to kind of retweet it and bring it out to a broader audience? That's more subjective. I might think, oh, here's the quality, here's the effort, here's what I'm doing. Don't I deserve this audience or this recognition?
Mm.
And but then you can even think about, and that has some connection. It's not perfect. We could all think about people who are underrated. It's not the way you're kind of recognized in this world is never perfect or perfectly fitting with merits. But you could go even further and just talk about like the accidents of seemingly random chance, fate, a really good person, a moral, virtuous person who just dies an early tragic death, whether through an accident or through cancer or whatever it is. And you kind of go, they don't deserve that. Like, is there any real fairness or fittingness in this life? So I think it depends on what kind of realm. Those can all sort of bleed into each other in our experience. On the one hand, there are basic matters of justice about what you deserve and what should be given. And part of Ecclesiastes is challenge. It's to recognize, even in those basic areas, like I'll just to quote a couple of places, he talking about justice in the strict sense, like what judges should give, what courts should give. He says in chapter 3, verse 16, moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness, and in the place
Mm.
of righteousness, even there was wickedness. And what he's talking about is a court. The court should be dispensing justice, but it doesn't. So there's a recognition of the fallenness, the corruption, the brokenness, even of earthly justice systems. So yeah, deserving, it's hard. If you let deserving be your kind of guiding star in your life, well, you'll be demanding, you'll be self-inflated, you'll never be satisfied. There's an appropriate way to insist on a fair payment, a fair judgment, that kind of thing. But if you're motivated fundamentally by here's what I deserve, Ecclesiastes would say number one, you're going to be really frustrated because it's just not going to happen. But number two, you also need to start recognizing that every good thing you have is a gift in the first place. And so in some ways you could boil down Ecclesiastes' ethic into the Apostle Paul's saying in 1 Corinthians 4:7, who sees anything different in you? What do you have that you did not receive?
Mm.
Receiving always comes before deserving. If God has given me any ability with words, ideas, whatever, well, that's not sure. There's an element of gift. We call it being gifted, right?
Hmm.
Well, where's the gift comes from? It comes from God. I didn't sort of make myself to have this certain gift or now, of course, you want to be a good steward, you want to develop those gifts, but receiving a gift always comes before deserving. So we should always be more humble and
Mm.
more thankful than we are demanding or entitled.
That's a good word, man. Let's talk a little bit about you. You touched on this for a second, and especially as we're talking to guys, work and what does Ecclesiastes say about work, and how do we find purpose in our work? Is it meaningless? Is it hevel?
Yeah. So there again, there's these Ecclesiastes speaks in both voices about work or both registers. So I'll start with the gift kind of perspective. Ecclesiastes 5:18 to 20. Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the
Mm.
few days of his life that God has given him, for this is his lot. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil, this is the gift of God. For he will not much remember the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart.
Mm.
So on the one hand, work itself is a gift, even if it's, what does that word toil imply? It implies things that could be hard, frustrating, boring, repetitive, painful. There's a whole lot of hard stuff you just have to accept. Even if you have a quote unquote dream job, even if you have a job that fits you very well and has all sorts of rewards, there's always kind of costs of doing business. There's always lame, annoying, boring, tedious stuff. And especially all the more so if you have a job that's just more a matter of necessity, whether it's manual labor, whether it's a more repetitive job, whether it's just this is the only job I can get, I got to provide for my family. Toil is common to all work, although probably different jobs have a different mix of kind of toil and enjoyment. But all work involves toil. Accepting toil and learning to rejoice in it is part of the key of really enjoying work. So to have the humility to recognize, yeah, none of this is going to go perfectly. None of the, I'm not going to enjoy every part of this, but there's something good in each of these tasks for me from God that I'm going to receive humbly and thankfully. That's an attitude toward enjoying work more than if you make work an idol. If you make work your kind of supreme source of satisfaction, validation, proving my worth, thinking about kind of issues of manhood and masculinity more broadly, I do think there's a legitimate sense in which it's kind of a cross-cultural value of manhood that men prove their worth by producing more than they consume. That's kind of a
Mm.
cross-cultural standard, producing more than you consume, protecting and providing for others, and procreation. It's kind of a trio of sort of cross-cultural, fairly universal standards of manhood. And so there is one sense in which it should be a sense of satisfaction, validation, but meaning to provide, to produce for others. But if you make it your kind of be all end all, if your job is your career, is your calling, is your identity, is your everything, well, boy, Ecclesiastes has some good stuff to say to you. Chapter 4, verses 7 to 8. Again, I saw vanity under the sun, hevel, absurdity. One person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This also is vanity and an unhappy business. So Ecclesiastes diagnosed a workaholic thousands of years ago, not a modern phenomenon. This person has no good reason for all the work they do, but they just keep spinning that hamster wheel. Part of it is the love of money. It says his eyes are never satisfied with riches. So work can get you money. In the right circumstances, more work can get you more money. And money has no built-in shut-off switch. Like if you
Mm.
eat until you can't eat anymore, okay, either you're just going to feel totally full or you're going to throw up, right? Like you're going to get sick. Your body can only handle so much, but your bank account could always receive more dollars.
Mm.
There's no shut-off switch to the desire for money. And the other rewards of work can be like that too, kind of status, recognition, advancement, achievement, accomplishment. You can always be kind of chasing one more. And so there is really a paradox. How can you work hard, but not work infinitely? How can you work diligently, but not wrapping up your whole identity in it? And so I think Ecclesiastes is two perspectives, recognizing the absurdity of work, the limits, the frustrations, the futility. That's one part of it. And also recognizing it's a gift. Like the workaholic actually doesn't recognize either. The workaholic doesn't recognize either the limits, the frustrations, and they don't recognize that it's a gift from God in the first place. You're going to answer to him for your stewardship of it.
Let's talk about someone who I feel like this is a great, like you said, this is such a deeply philosophical question. And for the person that may have just found this podcast and they don't really have a basis of faith, do you believe that this book is a great place maybe to start just with your questions? And what would you say to someone who's kind of seeking more answers about what faith looks like in their life?
Oh, that's a great question. And that question really is in the spirit of the book. Like the whole first half, the more observational part, doesn't depend on believing in God to kind of recognize the conclusions, the takeaways, the experiences. It's meant to resonate with what you might experience in these different realms of life, regardless of whether you are a committed believer in God or not. So yeah, I do think I think the topics Ecclesiastes addresses, wealth, pleasure, money, sex, status, all these different kinds of things, are just some of the stuff we most want to chase and we most want to seek
Hmm.
fulfillment in. So absolutely. If someone's just kind of happened upon this podcast, not a Christian, not a theist, I would say, yeah, I would encourage you to jump into the book, and I hope it would kind of carry you along. And I would hope it would resonate, especially maybe with some of your experiences of chasing something. Maybe then you even get that thing, but you still feel empty or need something more after that. I think Ecclesiastes names that experience and starts to get to the roots, starts to get to the reasons why. So what I would say is in that kind of conceptual structure of the book, walking through everything's absurd, everything's a gift, and there really is a life after this, and we'll answer to God for how we've lived. I think I would say that if you walk with Ecclesiastes through all those topics, I hope you'd become persuaded that the reason this world is such a weird mix of kind of captivating beauty and utter futility is that it's created by a good God and it bears the stamp of his goodness, his generosity. Food tastes so good. This nice little home brewed pour over a cup of coffee tastes so good because God is good. And he
Hmm.
gave us all these unnecessary goodnesses as clues, as hints to his own goodness. But why are things so messed up? Why do I have a 30-year-old friend who's dying of cancer right now? Why is there such heartbreak? Why is this world so, and why is it so like systemic? Like the messed upness goes through everything. Well, the biblical answer is that this world is created good and also fallen. And kind of getting those two worldview pieces in place. I would say Ecclesiastes gives us kind of like experiential, emotional, existential, kind of resonant reasons to affirm both of those, the goodness of creation and the reality of the fall. And if you've embraced those two things, and I'd just say the rest of the biblical storyline is all about how God makes a rescue plan. God has a rescue mission to redeem us from the conditions of the fall. That culminates in Jesus, him coming to earth, living a perfect life, dying on the cross, paying the penalty for sin, and then triumphing over death by rising from the dead. He's the answer to life's absurdity, and he's the end of absurdity. He's the true fulfillment of all of our greatest yearnings that won't end, won't go bad, won't spoil, and won't disappoint. To be a Christian, you still have to live through this life of frustration, futility, absurdity. We're still subject to those same struggles, but we have a crystal clear hope of a perfect fulfillment coming through Jesus.
How do you pass your faith on to the next generation? David Sunday has help for you with his book, Homegrown Disciples, coming up next week on Manly with Andy.